It's a wonderful day to be here, and especially in light of the fact that the Red Sox did an outstanding job last evening. And I'm only hoping that we can start celebrating and planning sort of the Duck Route tour through the city of Boston, Mayor, with your support. We are still on watch, so we'll keep our fingers crossed. But thank you very much. As Vice Chair of the Board of Boston College, I'm honored to welcome all of you to this latest installment of the Chief Executive Club of Boston. Before I introduce our very special guest, I'd like to thank and recognize the Chief Executive Club for their outstanding effort in planning this event and the many other luncheons that are held throughout the year for our benefit. The BC Club never fails to bring together the most fascinating speakers and most influential members of the business community to collaborate and build upon the ideas that have shaped our knowledge-based economy. Thank you, all of you. I also want to thank Marcy Reed, the Regional President of National Grid, for helping to secure today's fantastic speaker, but also for setting such a positive example in everything that you do. Your strong leadership at National Grid is rooted in your strong dedication to your employees and your deep understanding of every aspect of the energy business. You are a highly visible female executive who has been an inspiration to businesswomen and businessmen throughout our entire region. And your personal commitment to STEM education is helping our Commonwealth create a thriving network that will allow us to maintain a competitive advantage in the world for generations to come. Marcy, thank you. I often say that labor is to the Industrial Revolution as energy is to the innovative revolution. Natural gas, nuclear energy, wind farms and fossil fuels, electric power and solar energy. There are many sources of power, cost implications, and delivery methods that must be considered when developing a sound, forward-thinking energy policy. While the future of American energy may be unclear, what is clear is that energy policy will be the key driver to America's economic future and long-term global success. But beyond economics and America's leadership position in the world, energy policy has even greater implications. The energy sources of our future will impact the planet on which we live and our entire civilization as we know it. Can you think of another issue that has more far-reaching ramifications for our generations and the generations to come? This afternoon, I am honored to introduce an individual who is leading one of the world's largest and most influential energy organizations in the globe, National Grid. Born in Exeter, Great Britain, he joined the group at age 22 and scaled the corporate ladder for 19 years, gaining invaluable experience in the energy business. He joined National Grid in 2001 as a board of directors responsible for the UK and Europe. And after the merger of National Grid and the Lattice Group, he assumed full responsibility for the firm's electrical and gas transmission businesses. In 2007, he was appointed Chief Executive of National Grid. Beyond his influence and leadership in the energy industry, he is also a very passionate advocate for closing the skills gap through STEM education and training for our younger generation. His commitment to sustainability and lowering energy consumption for the future generations has made a powerful impression on the energy insiders, not to mention his wife and 3 children. A few years ago, I was very fortunate to meet him in person for the first time. He was gracious enough to visit me at my corporate offices in Roxbury, along with Marcy Reed. From the United Kingdom to Roxbury, Massachusetts, it was my very own British invasion. That was a humbling experience for me and one that I will never forget. I am honored to welcome him once again to our beloved city of Boston and Red Sox Nation. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to the CEO of National Grid, Mr. Steve Holliday.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that warm welcome, and thank you, John, for those very kind words. I did enjoy meeting you enormously, actually, and congratulations to your organisation, Suffolk Construction, who big part of the economy here, hugely successful. I'd also like to acknowledge Attorney General Coakley, Mayor Menino, and State Auditor Bump at this luncheon. It was really nice to spend a few minutes with you today. And of course, I was going to mention Marcy as well. I feel like it's unnecessary now. But it's always nice when people tell you about those folk that work with you. It just reflects the way that I feel about Marcy as well. She's a very special person, a very smart and capable leader, and most important of all, someone who has great humanity and great heart. As I was preparing for today, I saw in the newspapers this great excitement about this club. But it wasn't about me. It wasn't about energy. It was about the lunch menu, I noticed. And as I understand, there's been a bit of a change back to the old way, which is no doubt. And I had no idea whatsoever when I accepted this, that it would be the morning after Game 1 of the World Series. But I'm so relieved that everyone's smiling after last night's fantastic success. It is religion here. I've had the privilege to go to Fenway Park occasionally. There is no way I can afford a ticket for the rest of this series, though. And I'm sure there's some people who have investments in advertising and everything else that are quite concerned last night, actually. The city of Boston probably wants it to go to a few more games. We're hoping that there might be a different attitude this evening, but not too big. But 4-0 would be wrong. It'd be nice to go to Game 5 or Game 6, I suggest. But it's a privilege to be here on behalf of National Grid. It's an amazing job I have. It's a fantastic job. It's such a privilege to lead an organisation that is so special. And in my limited time here, I hope I can impart a little bit about why I think it is so special. Our job is pretty simple. We connect people to the energy that they use. That's it. You can make it sound very sophisticated, very complicated. Fundamentally, we connect people to the energy they use. It's impossible for anyone today to not understand just how important energy is. Increasingly, as John was saying, it's at the heart of economies, of course, but it's at the heart of the lifestyles that we all enjoy in the 21st century. You can't imagine not having light, not having warmth. Well, of course you can, because when a huge storm hits, you suddenly realize how important it is. It's just an essential part of the world in which we live in. Our business in the northeast of the US and the UK, we run those networks that deliver gas and electricity to tens of millions of people and businesses and communities. And I have a real fundamental belief that, of course, these are the systems that drive the economy. They drive technology, education, manufacturing, healthcare, and biotech, just to name a few in this region. And the lovely thing about our business is the pride that employees feel. Enormous pride, because they understand that what they do is provide an extraordinarily essential service to the well-being of customers and communities. That's the good news. There's a but. And the but is we have a significant challenge. A challenge that, I think as John was alluding to, affects every single one of us in this room. And it's increasingly capturing the imagination of the broader public and society. It is, I agree, one of the biggest challenges that we face, what I often refer to as a trilemma. How can we deliver cleaner energy in the future, ensure it's reliable, and at the same time, afford it? Things often in conflict. And I do believe that our company sits at the heart of that. We have an enormous role to play, not in developing policy, but help influencing as politicians struggle the world over to find the right answers. And it's not just a challenge in the Northeast, obviously. It's not just a challenge in Europe, not just in the US. It is a global challenge. And therein sits one of the conundrums. In the Western world, we have huge privilege to have access to reliable electricity at a price that today most people can afford. And we become hugely dependent on it. Many of you who travel international will realize that when you go to the developing world, you go to the Far East, when you go to parts of Africa, seeing huge investments in energy infrastructure, often driven by centrally planned governments, because they totally understand and recognize that the economy cannot survive without modern energy supplies and modern infrastructure. It underpins wealth, it underpins health and welfare, etc. If you look at the details, 1,200 coal plants are in the planning phase globally at the moment. It's no surprise where they're being built. 75% of those are being built in China and India alone. But the investments, of course, aren't just in fossil fuels. And China often gets a bad rap because of that. Chinese are polluting the world, they're just building lots of coal plants. They're the largest investor in the world in clean energy. Last year, they invested $65 billion. That's almost double the investment in clean energy in the United States at 34, and it's 7 times the investment in the UK, which is supposedly a leader in clean energy. And compared to the growth year on year in China, which in 2012 was 22% up on the prior year, investment in clean energy in Europe fell by 29%. Of course, that was influenced enormously by the economy and the downturn on the economy. But based on the trends that we were seeing, 2012 was a really interesting year in a forecast sense. It was supposed to be the first year ever where the amount of investment that went into clean energy was greater globally than the amount of investment that went into fossil fuels. I have a lovely chart. It shows these 2 lines converging and about to cross, and it didn't happen. They then diverged again. And the main reason for that divergence, partly the economic downturn in Europe, but moreover, the fact that renewable energy and cleaner energy had got significantly cheaper. Solar and wind both, the price reductions were enormous. So we still, in 2012, actually saw more going into fossil fuel. When I joined this organization in 2001, a number of friends said to me, "You're going to work in what sector?" Because as John said, I spent my whole life in energy, the beginning in Exxon, in a business that just felt exciting, the oil and gas business. And people who worked in that industry thought, "You're going to join a utility?" I can't have claimed for 1 second to have the foresight about the challenges that this company and this business would face in the coming months and years. Today, there's barely a day goes by without energy being in the newspapers. It's very rarely good news, though. I guess that's true about the newspapers. Generally, I might observe, but, other than the sports pages, which I turn to first anyway, to get a little bit of an injection of good news. It's normally about risk to security of supply. Are we on the right track in terms of energy? Prices are too high. I, like many business people, have a set of press clippings every day that are automatically actually delivered to me. On Sunday, I got up before the wife, before the children, opened up so I could look through the press, all my clippings. There were 103 articles in the British newspapers alone about energy last Sunday. 103! When I first became the CEO of this business, 12 would have been probably a normal Sunday. 103. And I want to look a little bit this afternoon at 4 areas of this challenge. 4 areas that we spend as a business, as I spend an enormous amount of time focused on. Number 1, aging infrastructure. Number 2, this revolution in energy supplies. Number 3, won't surprise anybody in this room, extreme weather, which would not have been on my list 5 years ago. And lastly, as many people have referred to already, skills. To address those 4 issues, our company has to fundamentally change the way in which it operates. Fundamentally change the way in which we operate. These 4 issues, I would argue, are also an enormous opportunity for the US, and particularly the Northeast, in leading the policy debate, and ultimately for customers, because everyone has to get involved in this discussion. This first challenge of aging infrastructure. A few years back, the US National Academy of Engineering polled all of their members and asked them, what was the greatest engineering achievement of the 20th century? The answer was not the transistor, not the microchip, not the Golden Gate Bridge, not the Big Dig in Boston either, interstate highway system, not aviation. The greatest achievement was the electrification of our system. Generation, transmission and distribution, tying homes and businesses into reliable electricity. 20th century greatest achievement. The challenge, of course, is that much of that infrastructure, particularly in the old industrial part of the US, is still very original. It's a privilege to operate parts of the system that I believe, rather facetiously, should be in a museum. But we do. In upstate New York, we have a line that was built by Thomas Edison. It's an amazing, amazing compliment to the engineers that put that in place. When they built that, they had no idea in 2013 we'd still be operating it. It was only in 2006 that we retired the 25 cycle equipment that Tesla and Westinghouse had built in the Niagara Falls, only 7 years ago. The average age of transformers, don't need to know the technology, but something on a very important piece of our systems, average age on our system is 49 years. The oldest transformer we have is 103 years old. And I fondly tell this story everywhere. I remember going to upstate New York and visiting a building that houses some of this equipment and finding on the archway, engraved in the archway, 1923. And I said to the guy, I said, "It's so nice that you've kept this old building." He looked at me, what is he talking about? And as the door of the building opened, I realized the look, because everything inside the building was from 1923. My next mistake was then another stupid, naive question. It must be tough to get parts for this. His answer was slightly polite. "Steve, I've worked for this company now for 36 years. When I joined, you couldn't get parts for this." Now, we have a similar challenge in the UK. Very old infrastructure. We've just agreed an 8-year contract with the regulator there. That means we'll be investing $40 billion over the next 8 years. Some of that's to do with tying in these new sources of energy, but a huge amount of it is just to go to replacing old infrastructure. But of course, not replacing like with like. Modern, smarter infrastructure, the things we need to facilitate new technology and develop a very different energy system for the future. The second challenge is this revolution in energy sources. It's driven by a number of factors. Number one, many of the power stations are themselves very old and therefore need replacing. The second is this realization of the impacts on climate and this huge challenge we face globally about, do we really want to do something about it? Or do we push that on for another generation? And the third that's affecting that, of course, is the exciting one here, which is shale gas. You have no idea how much of my life I spend talking about shale gas outside of the United States. Because everybody looks at the United States with just green envy. Can we please have some of that here? The World Energy Council issued a report only 2 weeks ago, and they talked about renewable energy. They talked about the fact that the capacity is going to go up from 23% today to 34% in 2030. A huge expansion. But it needs a much more flexible approach for businesses like ours, because one of the flip sides of renewable energy is its intermittency, its lack of control, its unpredictability. In Germany, that has had a huge race towards clean energy and installed an enormous amount of solar, on July the 7th this year, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, over half of the energy that was being consumed in Germany was coming from solar power. 4 hours later, that was down to 20%, and 1 hour, 15 minutes later, that was down to 0. Now just think about a country that size, where half of its power that was there at lunchtime had decided to shut down by early evening. Huge swings, huge challenges. And those of you who've been to the UK might observe that the sun doesn't shine there very often. But we're still building quite a bit of solar. National Grid itself is handling requests to connect 36,000 megawatts of wind in the next 15 years. 15 of that being onshore, all the rest offshore in deep waters. And that compares to only 4 to 5 that we have connected to today. In Scotland, where they're building a huge amount of onshore wind, the government of Scotland have 2,500 requests to build wind farms over the last 18 months. That's 7 a day. 7 a day. That, I would argue, is a revolution. It won't all happen, of course. The economics don't work. Of course, the story in Massachusetts isn't particularly different. We've had 1,600 applications, mostly solar, to want to connect to our systems in Massachusetts. 1,600 applications. And of course, we've got the large projects, Cape Wind and Deepwater Wind off Rhode Island. Are they competitive today? No. But will, when they get built, the price come down? I would argue it certainly will. Of course, all of these require investments in the networks. And then we come on to shale. This enormous growth, 26% per year for the last 8 years. And I can assure you, the envy of the world with gas prices where they are today. Forecasts of shale gas around the globe, though, do vary enormously. If you follow it like I do, you can become very disenchanted very quickly at just how quick the numbers seem to move. An optimist one week and a pessimist is doing something the following week. But I do believe it is a huge opportunity for Europe in particular, and it is a mistake for a country like France that has point blank said, we will never exploit shale gas. They may well live to regret that. In the UK, our government is desperate to exploit shale gas. Brackets, if we can make sure we have the resources that people are forecasting. Here, though, it's a game changer. And it's not only in terms of security of supply, the fact that it's local, it changes the geopolitics enormously, but the knock-on effect to gas prices, affordability, and the knock-on effect to electricity prices. For us, it's driven up the number of people, of course, who want to connect to natural gas. You may remember it wasn't that long ago we were running adverts on television here trying to convince consumers to turn from dirty oil to clean gas. Our adverts talked about, if you do so, you will take 3 4x4s off the road for the rest of your life. Think about that, as well as the economics. Today, we don't need to advertise. The price differential is so great, we're having to work very, very hard to keep up with all of those connections. And the real challenge is the big network expansions that are required. But climate change isn't just, I would argue, about clean energy. It's, of course, about the weather. Now, I'm not a climatologist. I'm not a scientist. I'm an engineer. But it's pretty clear to me that the weather has changed. Globally, there were 800 plus extreme events in 2012. 800. That translates, of course, into an enormous amount of unimaginable pain. Pain and suffering. $130 billion estimated in damages globally. National insurance giant Munich Re recently concluded that the frequency of events in North America over the last 10 years had gone up nearly 500%, and were rising rapidly more in North America than anywhere else in the world. We participated in a study with the non-profit Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, taking a really hard, objective, and sobering look at how companies are assessing and dealing with those risks. It's very obvious that I'd be talking about that risk running a business like ours. It's not so obvious the impacts on other businesses. That research found that 55 out of the Standard & Poor's Global 100 companies had suffered serious financial damage as a result of extreme weather. Yet according to the same study, very few companies were systematically thinking about those risks, how they plan for resilience and their operations. And if they do, at best, what they do is they look backwards at what happened and try and work out how to be better prepared in the future. And that's a little bit of a story about National Grid, frankly. We're very proud of the way that we respond in storms. They are very challenging. Employees go the extra mile in a situation that's unbelievable. But in 2011, we were caught off guard with Hurricane Irene. Because in many ways, our planning for storms was also about, let's look backwards about what used to happen, and let's make sure we're better prepared for the future. And of course, looking backwards isn't enough. The planning didn't take account of the huge logistical challenges that now come from some of these storms that impact multiple parts of our business at the same time, across 3 states. We hadn't seen anything like that before in our history. Learning from that, though, helped us prepare for the infamous Superstorm Sandy, whose anniversary we're about to, I think, respect. I almost was going to say celebrate. Just a year ago, that terrible tragedy, without any question. Hadn't seen anything like that before. Super is the right word. Unprecedented. Damaging gas systems and electric systems at the same time. Irene and the northeaster in October 2011 took us 79 and 127 hours to restore 9% of the outages here. It was 41 hours for Sandy and 32 for Nemo. Much better performance. But the size of these things is just unbelievable. During Sandy, we replaced 5,000 poles in 9 days, 3,000 transformers, had 15,000 workers from across 48 states in the US and 6 parts of Canada, all working in the Northeast, working 16-hour shifts, rebuilding systems from scratch. We replaced 100,000 gas meters that had been flood damaged, 40,000 regulators. I often very sarcastically actually say to my team, if we can do that much in 2 weeks, just talk me through how long it takes us to build some of these new systems normally. But joking aside, extreme weather's here to stay. Look out the window today and you can't believe even talking about weather. We have to make sure we design for the future. But it does open up an enormous social, societal debate, actually. How much do we all want to invest to protect against events, in an insurance sense, versus we'll suffer the consequences and we'll invest in making sure that we're well prepared and we can then restore things quickly? It is clearly a trade-off. And affordability has to be a key consideration, and never more than today. But we have to converse with people about what is that right trade-off. There is no doubt if we don't invest, reliability will suffer. It's important that we find the right solutions, efficient solutions. They're clear, they're transparent, and the rationale and the decisions that are made are not decisions that a company like ours make. They're decisions that we're all involved in making. And the final of my 4 challenges was the skills gap. This week, I've had 2, this is my 3rd lunch this week. I could be putting on a lot of weight if I was not careful. And 2 of my other lunches have been with our employees on Long Island and then yesterday here in Boston. Employees that are celebrating over 40 years of service with National Grid. We're doing a series of lunches. There are 404 of our employees in the US who are celebrating over 40 years of service. I put on a few pounds in the UK doing similar events for 268 employees there with over 40 years of service. That in the US is 17,008 years of service. And I don't know your businesses. I'm incredibly proud that we've got 700 people almost who've done 40 years of service. That's pretty special. That's pretty special. Including one chap on Long Island who I met on Monday, has done 62 years of service. I didn't know what to say without saying something that was hugely inappropriate. Why? He's 82 years of age, still working. Still unbelievable. But of course, the flip side of that is we need hundreds and hundreds of people to come and run this business in the future. And the shortage of people who are studying STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths, here in the US and in the UK, the statistics are absolutely the same. The lack of enthusiasm for those subjects, the lack of understanding about the fantastic jobs and careers that they lead to. Of course, we need them. So go back to what we have to do. We've got to bring these challenges together. This aging infrastructure, this clean energy, this resiliency against extreme weather, and affordability. So I'm talking about how we modernize our systems. And some of you may have heard a conversation we are trying to engage customers and stakeholders in about the utility of the future. And when I talk about that, I think about 4 characteristics. And the first of those is encouraging customers to use significantly less energy. It's an unusual business model, but it's true. Because of the way that we've been able to work with regulators in both the UK and the US and remove the drivers of volume from our business, it allows us to work with our customers to drive down energy demand. There's a group that did a report last year that our own Tom King from here worked with Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, looking at saving energy. 57% of energy consumed in the US is lost along the way to heat and leaks. That, I'm afraid to let you know, puts the US pretty much at the bottom of the pile in terms of energy utilization. If that could be halved by 2030, that's worth $327 billion a year. Imagine pumping that back into the economy. And of course, a carbon reduction of 4 billion metric tons a year. Just a phenomenal opportunity. Now, I know I'm preaching to the converted in Massachusetts. You're number 1. Number 1 ranked energy efficiency state in the whole of the United States. Green Communities Act of 2008 is a model for energy efficiency. Governor Patrick and the legislature were forward-looking when they wrote the Green Communities Act. I thank them for their productive partnership over the last 7 years. And congratulations to you, Mayor Menino, as well, for putting Boston top of the list on green cities in America. I'm proud that we're part of that. We've been a leader in energy efficiency since the 80s. But it's not enough. We can do more, and we have to do more. We have to think about building standards and transportation and so much more. But the second characteristic of this new utility is taking a very different approach with customers, a much more holistic approach. We have to create long-term, multi-year holistic plans, not short-term plans that are just solving yesterday's problems. As well as these huge engineering challenges of redesigning the systems, we've got to make sure we're much more flexible as people have different ambitions for their homes. People will generate so much power in their homes in the future. These systems will become so much more dynamic. Currently, we're planning to invest over $2 billion this year, making infrastructure improvements in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New York. Is that enough? Is that enough? Statistically, I would argue it's holding things still. Definitely not deteriorating, but not making a huge difference. And the risk in essential infrastructure is asymmetric. If you underinvest and get it wrong, all of us, do that. And the damage, of course, when we lose the power to our economy is enormous. But we can't afford to do too much either. But we need to move the paradigm. We need a new framework. We are definitely changing. Changing in the way in which we interact with our customers and stakeholders. Listening. I talk across my company all the time about, can we please listen more? I know we've got lots of smart people, but we just have to listen more to what people need and what they believe they can afford. And thirdly, that's about innovation, being much more innovative, both in technology and in the way we think about the policy going forwards. I have some examples where progress is being made. Here in Massachusetts, in the city of Worcester, we have a pilot to put smart technology in, electric transportation, new sources of generation, smart homes where power flows are monitored, where pricing is different between the day, the middle of the day, the evening, and the nighttime. 15,000 homes will be connected over the next year. And so much of that design has been designed by customers, explaining what they would like to test. We will learn so much about behaviors. And I'm sure that some of the things that we think are going to be really good ideas are going to be awful, and some things that we're not really interested in are going to come through this as potentially great salvation for the future. We have a pilot for gas expansion on Rhode Island, where we're building the infrastructure before the customers are there. It's the only way we're going to unlock future gas use. And the final aspect of our business goes right back to this skills debate. We have to be so much more linked in to schools and colleges. I can be quite defensive. We do an awful lot. We have a huge number of relationships with Boston College. MIT are here, where we're doing some amazingly innovative modeling to do with weather forecasting, for example. And elsewhere, we've got partnerships across the US about sustainable energy, carbon capture and storage, smart grids, lots of good relationships. We're in schools and colleges, talking about STEM, Marcy herself. Employees going to schools such as BC High, share, get practical experiments going about wind, sustainability, robotics in 10th grade and 11th grade students, getting them really excited about science. But it's just not enough. It's still not breaking through. We've got to up our game and do more, and we have to try and persuade other businesses to help as well. So that's the utility of the future. Energy efficiency, number one. Not trying to grow volumes, trying to help people decrease their volumes. Smarter, modern, reliable infrastructure. Plans that have to go out over multi-years as we think about the future and try and get it right. Allow for technology and innovation that we can't even see today, because it will come along in the course of the next 10 years. And a very different, dense relationship with schools and universities. And to do all these things, we're going to have to create the right regulatory paradigm, because we can't deliver all of this with the arrangements that are there today. We have to share these discussions and decisions around trade-offs. We have to start thinking regionally about energy plans that are not just for Massachusetts, but I'd argue for the northeast of the US. And there's an enormous opportunity for the northeast to take a leading position out into the future about energy policy. It requires us to step up. It requires others, I think, to help put this framework together, to get the right incentives in place. Now, I started by talking about the US Academy's view that engineering of this system was the greatest achievement of the 20th century. I challenge us, actually. This enormous tipping point that we're at probably means that we need to be able to look back at the 21st century and repeat that achievement. And if we start anywhere, the most exciting place that has the innovation, the foresight historically to start thinking about that is right here in the northeast of the US. Thank you very much. Absolutely.
Steve has agreed to take a few questions, so maybe people from the audience, if you could raise your hand and offer up a question, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your remarks, and I applaud all the work that you're doing on green energy and lowering the cost of green energy. But my question comes from the offshore wind off Cape Cod, and why would National Grid agree to pay more than twice the cost for that wind than alternatively available wind onshore, or maybe even 3 times the cost of alternative energy from Canada?
It's at the heart of all of my remarks. This is the dilemma we have in that sense. We will never have enough wind onshore to provide the clean energy. And there are plenty of people around who don't want a lot of onshore wind either in terms of the visual amenity, the damage that it does. Offshore wind is an enormous opportunity in the northeast, and as it is in the UK. The costs today are high. So you have to find a way in which you can incentivize to begin to kickstart almost a new technology with an ambition and a confidence that over time, once you do that, prices will come down. Cape Wind itself, of course, ends up as a very small part of the bill overall. But you're absolutely right. If you're to get these new technologies to come forward, they need some form of subsidy. And that subsidy comes in the form of higher prices. The policymakers have a real conundrum here, which is the balance of how fast can we go towards that new world? How much can we afford to go towards there? And I don't know the answer to the pace. I do believe in my heart, though, that as a society, we have no choice. Fossil fuels will run out. We can leave that problem to our kids and our grandkids, or we can get on to start to incentivize the new technologies to come forward. That means ultimately that as customers, we have to pay a little bit of a premium for that.
Another question?
Thank you very much for your comments. They were fascinating. It was interesting to sit through a presentation when you think about energy in this country over a longish period of time and not hear the word nuclear mentioned once. I'm wondering what your perspective is on whether that, subject obviously to new technology and a lot of new regulations probably in the wake of the Japanese situation, whether that has any promise for our future at all.
I will very much give you a personal view. And it is very interesting what's going on across the globe. Of course, Japan has shut down all but 2 of its nuclear reactors. The German government made a decision that they will phase out nuclear completely. The prices of electricity in Germany are probably the highest in the world right now, as they've done that, and the instability that they have because of the fact they've lost so much of that stable source of power is phenomenal. The UK, you may have noticed in the media this week, on Monday, announced that the arrangements, which goes back to the gentleman's question on Cape Wind, the price that they will pay to construct a new nuclear power station in the UK that will start up in 2023. An enormous nuclear power plant, I have to say, 3,600 megawatts of power. And it is the price that the government have agreed to give the developers of that plant for 35 years is twice the prevailing price of electricity today. That is because they believe that when you try and square this circle of clean, low-carbon energy, stable energy, at a price that long-term can be afforded, you can't do that without nuclear power. That's clearly not a view that is shared worldwide. But the UK is determined to rebuild all of the nuclear plants that are going to shut in the course of the next 15 years. And I do think it's an essential part of a mix where you have so much intermittency as well, because it's so reliable and so stable. But it is back to a pricing issue again.
Thank you again for your speech today. David Matias with Vodia Ventures. You may have touched on this topic, but energy independence is a buzzword that's been bandied around quite a bit in the press here, even though it actually isn't true. It's an energy, so let's just say, shift in that direction. I fully agree with your thoughts that clean tech, efficiencies, ways to better use the energy that we have today are paramount in terms of our energy future. Unfortunately, the notion of energy independence could very much change the political discourse, and the geopolitical ramifications are enormous in terms of U.S. policy. Just a question, how do you see this dynamic evolving over the next 10 years, where you've got, on the one hand, an economic tension towards alternative energy and efficiencies, and on the other hand, now you're going to have a trend literally in the opposite direction, maybe for real or maybe just perceived?
I think the simple answer to that is back to, I was trying to say about shale gas, actually, and what a fantastic opportunity that it is for the US. Because first of all, natural gas, when we look out to 2050, we can't see a world in 2050 without natural gas, particularly in the northeast of the US or in northern Europe, where for heating reasons, you will never heat with electricity. You will build enormous power stations that will only operate 2 months of the year. The economics are foolish, so using gas for space heating at the margin will, we believe, be there for 30, 40 years to come. Gas is also a great transition fuel if you burn an awful lot of coal. You can see that in the stats in the US. The carbon emissions in the US have come down enormously in the course of the last year because actually coal stations have been uneconomic and have been shutting with cheap natural gas. The flip side, interestingly, in the UK is as the US has not been consuming coal and been exporting coal, coal prices in Europe have come right down. Gas prices are really high. We're burning more coal than we've burnt in 20 years, and carbon emissions have gone up. That's an interesting perplex, isn't it? But I do think the gas is both a fuel for the future in heating and is a transition fuel towards a cleaner energy mix as well. So we'll burn natural gas, I would argue, in generation for another 20 years. Carbon capture and storage technology, then taking the carbon out of the flue gas and storing it underground, may well mean that gas plays a role much further into the future as well. And the US is not a net exporter, you're absolutely right, it isn't going to be, but the economic benefits of cheap gas are very clear to see in terms of industry and manufacturing really thinking about relocating back to the US.
Steve, thank you very much. We really do appreciate your time and that wonderful speech. Hands over.